Good evening. My name is Claudette Gray. I'm a proud member of Zion Baptist Church. I was baptized here 70 years ago this June. My family has been involved in this church from the early days that you're going to hear about as we present Zion's history to you today. This gentleman who I am sitting under was the fifth pastor. His name was Reverend William Thomas Anthony, but he was known to my family as W.T. You see, he was a native Richmonder, and he and my grandfather, John Oliver Lockett, were friends. And you're going to bear witness to a lot of the tragedies that Zion suffered and how the Lord always brought them through. During the worst periods of oppression that this country has ever known, we, who are now known as blacks, have evolved from various descriptions. Sambo, Pickaninny, colored, Negro, and a lot more derogatory in every aspect that is uttered. Any of you who witnessed Roots by Alex Haley have a visual of just how our ancestors suffered once here. Around 1865, our founders were known to worship in homes of various members in secret. Our people were not allowed to congregate and meet publicly. However, the desire overwhelmed the risk, and because there was so much to thank God for, these communities flourished in that manner. Just knowing how God had kept, delivered, and saved us, the least that we can ever do is to praise His holy name. Our founders and Moses Wilkes, the pastor, began to dream of a physical building for worship services. The founders were Moses Wilkes, pastor, Joseph F. Bebbs, John Wright, Randall Jones, Henry Coleman, Archie Taylor, and Henry Stevens. Moses Wilkes was most capable as our pastor. However, he felt inadequate because he was a former slave, uneducated, and a carpenter by trade. The desire for a building to worship in and an educated minister was all he wanted to leave his congregation with. In 1888, an old abandoned warehouse that used to store tobacco was sold to them and became known as 22nd Street Baptist Church. Located at 400 West 22nd Street, this area was known as Tan Yard Bottom, partly industrial, partly residential. Our church began to grow and flourish, and the Sunday school even had 60 members. The superintendent at that time was Henry Stevenson, and he was able to get our church into the National Baptist Association of Sunday Schools. Around 1890, a young diviner, that's what they used to call them, diviners, as they were known then, Henry Gordon C. Coleman became the second pastor as Moses Wilkes retired. Gordon C. Coleman was a 17-year-old who was from Halifax, Virginia, and working towards the completion of his bachelor's degree and being tutored by the Reverend Anthony Banger, pastor of First Baptist Church, Manchester. Once his degree was obtained, Reverend Gordon C. Coleman became well known in the area, and he was referred to as the preacher who could pack the church to suffocation. That's how he was known, as crowds of 800 to sometimes 1,000 would pack the church for 3 services at 400 West 22nd Street each Sunday. The congregation grew. Revivals were held in May, followed by spirit-filled baptizings as the people would walk in throngs to the James River. Reverend Coleman immersed 42 candidates on the 20th of June, 1896, with a celebration. During one occasion, when 22nd Street Baptist Church hosted a service featuring a woman preacher, this building began to show signs of distress. The floor began shifting, the windows crashed as the roof swayed. People were crushed and trampled as they fled. Thanks be to God, no loss of life occurred. The building was eventually slated for demolition, and the congregation began the search for another church, a second building. We all know that tragedies are truly commonplace. On July 31st, 1892, Zion founder Moses Wilkes was struck by lightning and killed. This was as he left a job site where he had been working somewhere in the vicinity of Stockton Street. He was now the minister of Fourth Baptist Church, which was on 22nd Street, but a little further up on 22nd Street. Zion mourned this loss of their founder, Moses Wilkes. As the search began for a second building, God's infinite wisdom led Reverend Coleman to build this new church, not entertain the idea of another formerly used occupied dwelling. The cornerstone was laid during a ceremony by the Masons January 29, 1898, and 9 months later, just like the birth of a child, on the 5th Sunday in October 1898, the congregation marched into newly named Zion Baptist Church, 34 West 22nd Street. Zion became known as the Jewel of Manchester because of its grandeur and beauty. Some years later, however, the congregation became troubled regarding expenses. Although Reverend Coleman was still receiving accolades and praise, the highest praises through news articles, after 10 years of service, Reverend Coleman and family left Virginia. He would later be found with Professor James H. Blackwell, as both would assume offices within a growing benevolent organization. Reverend Coleman was elected president. Dr. James H. Blackwell became manager secretary of the Benevolent Investment and Relief Association. The pulpit is empty. In May of 1901, Reverend James H. Burke from Roanoke, Virginia, became Zion's third pastor. He became known as an excellent preacher. He baptized 13 souls in the James River. He preached at the Virginia State Baptist Convention. And he was known to observe all of the tenets that had become Zion, that had become 22nd Street Baptist Church and now Zion in Manchester. Within a year, Reverend James H. Burke left Zion to pastor a church in Lynchburg, Virginia. Once again, the pulpit is empty. In June of 1903, Reverend W.R. Ashburn of Cleveland, Virginia, was called to become Zion's fourth pastor. He became active in Sunday School Union and often held fundraisers for the organization. He delivered installation addresses. Reverend Ashburn continued to serve Zion for 4 years, and in 1907, he left the city to fulfill other endeavors. Zion's pulpit remained vacant until 1909, when Reverend William T. Anthony, native Richmonder, was called to become Zion's 5th pastor. Reverend Anthony was awesome in all aspects. He was a masterful preacher, singer. He could be heard through all of 22nd Street as he worked and walked towards the neighborhood, greeting his members and friends. He gained a reputation of saving the soul of the hardest cold-blooded men, as they would be brought to tears through his sermons and songs. Zion flourished under Reverend Anthony, but over the course of several years, the neighborhood became less than stellar, a red light district. Zion finds their once beautiful edifice undesirable and unsafe for congregants and to attend their services. But what recourse do they have? This building is 13 years old and not paid for. On May 31st, 1911, at the height of an electrical storm, lightning strikes Zion Baptist Church, and the building burns to the ground because there was quite a problem trying to get water in that area of Tan Yard Bottom. That area was known to be marshy, and this is really what caused the church to burn to the ground. All efforts failed as firemen fought the flames valiantly. The loss was estimated to be $12,000. But standing amid the ashes, Reverend Anthony states, "We will rebuild." Joshua chapter 1 verse 9 states and declares, "Remember that I have commanded you to be determined and confident, for I, the Lord your God, am with you wherever you go." Within a matter of weeks, in mid-June 1911, Mr. A. Powell sold a parcel of land to the trustees of Zion for the sum of $169. This parcel of land was located at 20th and Decatur Street. Hope springs eternal. As we see God's hand of mercy at work, a massive undertaking begins as the congregation, officials, and pastors start the process of building a third church for their worship. During this construction, Zion held its services at the Young Men's Love and Union Hall, benevolent organization that's located at 1900 Decatur Street. And around 1915, the cornerstone was laid for 2006 Decatur Street as hopes began to brighten. The family of Zion is undaunted as they witness the foundation, the basement being built. On a typical Saturday, June 9, 1917, Reverend Anthony was doing his usual walk through 22nd Street, singing, greeting his congregation and even strangers that he didn't know. He loved singing through the neighborhood. But early Sunday morning, June 10th, 1917, the news of his death shook the city. Zion must face yet another tragedy. In its unfinished state, however, the funeral service was held, and it was a stately event. State, city, and county officials made their way to Zion Baptist Church to say their final goodbyes to one so loved. Zion mourned for 18 months. Once again, Zion is mourning. They mourned for 18 months at the death of this beloved pastor, Dr. William Thomas Anthony. The Richmond Planet newspaper reported that the city basically came to a standstill upon learning of his untimely death. Many statesmen, black and white, would often attend Zion to hear Reverend Anthony preach and sing. He was considered a burning light, shining, and a credit to his people. God's own anointed child. On April 5th, 1919, Reverend J.W. Dudley arrived in Richmond from Flatbush, New York, with his family to become the 6th pastor of Zion Baptist Church. He swiftly got involved with preparing for the annual revival, which was held in May. Many souls came to Christ nightly. He was known to preach soul-stirring sermons. Newspaper accounts of the new thing happening in Zion told of the union of Zion and Second Baptist Church uniting and combining revival services. This was heralded as the greatest spiritual awakening in South Richmond, formerly known as Manchester. Zion continued to prosper under Reverend Dudley. He had a parsonage at 1715 Everett Street, and services were held each Sunday at Zion at 8 a.m., Sunday school, 9:30 a.m., morning service, followed by 11:30 service. On April 6, 1929, Reverend Dudley left Zion to accept the call to pastor in Camden, New Jersey. He had led Zion for 9 years. Later in 1929, Zion called this 7th pastor, the Reverend John Junius Harris, a native of South Carolina. Reverend Harris had been in Richmond since 1922 and pastored several churches. His tenure at Zion was 1929 to 1954, and this was during difficult economic times as well as a time of the Korean conflict in 1951. Reverend Harris led Zion through these tumultuous times admirably. With the guidance of the Heavenly Father, the mortgage was paid off, the sanctuary was remodeled, Sunday school classes were formed, free will offerings initiated, which ended charging at the door. The congregation was encouraged to testify openly about the goodness of the Lord in their daily lives. Ill health took its toll, and in July 1954, at a church meeting, the decision was made to seek another pastor. On the second Sunday in October, an appreciation service was held. He officially retired February 1955. Reverend Harris died November 22nd, 1955, having served Zion for 25 years. Prior to his death, a pulpit committee had been named to search for a new pastor. With the assistance of Dr. W.L. Ransom of First Baptist Church, this committee recommended the Reverend Merlin Taft Fleming to become Zion's 8th pastor. At the church meeting on December 17, 1954, the call was extended and accepted by Reverend Fleming. And on February 6, 1955, Reverend Merlin Taft Fleming became our 8th pastor, thus beginning another dynamic leadership at Zion. Early accomplishments were fundraisers frequently held to pay off renovation costs, membership pledge system, envelopes that is, was initiated, auditing and financial system began, the child care center opened, kitchen was added, restrooms improved, outside brickwork, hermostone, transportation ministry formed, missions and education ministries were formed, public address system, air conditioning was installed, and Zion's motto was created at that time by Reverend Fleming. The motto being the church with the genuine fellowship. It was early during 1960, a period of civil unrest, that Reverend Fleming encouraged the congregation to become involved and participate and exercise their civil and civic duty to participate in demonstrations and marches to protest segregation. He led by example. In 1962, Virginia Seminary conferred Doctor of Divinity degree on Zion's pastor. He served faithfully until 1980, when illness became a situation. In April of 1981, Dr. Fleming became Pastor Emeritus, and he died May 3rd, 1982. Once again, Zion is in mourning after another 25 years of dynamic leadership. On May 29th, 1981, the duties and responsibilities of serving Zion Baptist Church as its 9th pastor were extended to Reverend Robert L. Pettis, native of East Palo Alto, California. Reverend Pettis arrived at Zion having attended Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, and Virginia Union School of Theology, Richmond, Virginia. He was selected to the School of Theology in 1993 as one of his first candidates for the doctoral program at Virginia Union University, and received his Doctor of Divinity degree in May 1993. Under his leadership, Zion has expanded and added ministries to meet the needs of the congregation. Among them, evangelism ministry, literacy, media, children's church, women's Bible fellowship, intercessory prayer, new members class, M.T. Fleming scholarship, men's fellowship. Dr. Pettis has written several books. His emphasis on education and leadership are sought after throughout the city of Richmond. Dr. Pettis' family consists of wife Palmer, children Nicole, Ashley, and Robert. Reverend Pettis was consistently known as a teacher, shepherd, being led by the Holy Spirit. He continually would instill in the congregation that we are the mind, message, ministry, and mission of Jesus Christ.
Good afternoon. My name is Heywood Harrison. I was director of music at Zion from, actually, I came to Zion in 1981, and I began as the musician and director of the Harrison Memorial Choir, which was a youth choir at the time. It's very interesting how I got here. I was in graduate school at the time and came home from the library one afternoon, and there was a group of young ladies at my house meeting with my mother, who was a sponsor of a group called the Isis-Arettes. And at that meeting was Florence Watkins and her daughter Bridget. And Mrs. Watkins asked me if I knew anybody that would be interested in playing for a youth choir, because they saw the piano in my living room. And of course I said no, and my mother said, "How about you?" So I said I really wasn't necessarily interested, but I said, okay, you can put my name on the list. A few weeks later I get a call, and I came over to Zion to interview, and I think my first Sunday at Zion was probably January of 1981. Right after that, I worked with both the Harrison Memorial Choir, and I also worked with the senior choir at the time as organist. And I worked with Geraldine Brandon, who was choir director at the time, until her passing. And after she passed, Dr. Pettis asked me if I would be willing to serve as director of music for Zion Baptist Church, and that was probably around 1980, somewhere in the 1982-83 range. And I was here at Zion until 2021, when I resigned as the director of music. I enjoyed every minute of the time I was here, and all of the choirs that I worked with, and all of the folks, and I'm privileged to be able to share a little bit about the music ministry at Zion. One thing I'd like to say about the music at Zion, when I first got here, I was very, very impressed. Zion has a rich history of music and choirs, and it obviously had great leadership prior to me being here, so it was really easy coming into an environment where people really appreciated music. And I remember thinking at the time, the youth choir particularly, I could basically bring them anything, and they were so willing to sing, and I was just, thrilled about that, just because they were just a great group of mostly young ladies at the time to work with, and that was also great. The senior choir was just, they had obviously had really good leadership and musicians in the past, and did a great variety of music, which was something that a lot of churches are not used to. And I mean, we did hymns, we did anthems, we did spirituals, we did all kinds of gospel. I think probably my greatest influence is that maybe I introduced to them a greater variety of gospel music than they may have been used to in the past. But other than that, and they all were willing to learn whatever I would bring them. And that was just a great thing, and I feel like sometimes you come into a church and you have to struggle to get people to work with you, but I never felt like I had that issue here at Zion, and I really appreciate the people who were involved in the music ministries, particularly in the earlier days when I was here.
Greetings, I'm Verlissa Williamson, with a reflection of Zion's media ministry, the technology age. The established media ministry consisted of Sonia Burke, Tyrone Anderson, and ministry leader Leon Burke. In 1982, with the development for reproduction of the preached message by recording on audio cassette, the church had at its disposal a tool with unlimited capabilities. With the use of an animated cassette, the vision expanded to include more components to the recording of Sunday service. Whether it was staffing or technical difficulties, the central goal was to record the preached word. Just in case an error occurred, 2 cassette tape master copies were recorded. Of course, the work in the ministry didn't end during a recording or after. Tasks for distribution, editing, creating labels, equipment care, and upgrades were all an endless process. Because we were not on radio or television, Zion wanted to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ with Give-A-Tape Outreach, GTO, a creative aspect of witnessing. The availability encouraged evangelism amongst our members to people we met daily or people outside of our immediate environment. It also allowed Zion's shut-in members to stay connected. There was a mailing list to persons in the military, locally, and across the United States. Tapes were left in phone booths or by any other means thought of. There was a very minimal cost of $3 to offset some of the church's expenses to the ministry. Whether purchased or not, tapes were provided with no questions asked for enjoyment or assistance in studying God's Word. Recordings were also done by a camcorder on a VHS videotape transmitted to a television for in-house viewing in our basement area. In 1987, a 5-year catalog of audio tape sermons and worship services was presented to Zion, including workshops, associate and guest ministers, revivals, choir concerts, and other memorable service events. Our media ministry was sought after to provide audio cassette recordings for local events sponsored by Richmond's Baptist Ministers Conference, Citywide Revival, and the Baptist General Convention of Virginia. In the late 90s, I joined the ministry, soon to learn that the Burks would be retiring after over 20 years of dedicated service to the ministry. The transition was smooth. However, the assignment was huge: to continue moving Zion forward on yesterday's dedication. Audio cassette distribution grew to become available immediately after service. Listening devices changed. The world became digital. People wanted to see the service again, not just listen. Around 2005, we shifted to accommodating the need and chose to start first by providing recordings on DVD while still providing cassettes. Not long after, we phased out cassette recordings to CDs. Over the years, we knew the ministry would have to pivot again, but the mission remained the same.